So what are the limits on Congress's power? How can we make sure that Congress in some which way, shape or form cannot overtake all the power that is given to it, but actually is limited in some way by either the Constitution or by other bodies? So the first way that Congress's power is limited is through the idea of reserved versus delegated powers. If you remember a couple of chapters ago, we talked about the idea of reserved powers and delegated powers. The Constitution expressly allows the states certain kinds of powers that the state can hold by themselves, and these are reserve powers. So there is a constitutional limit on how much power Congress can take over. The same thing with judicial review. In addition to the constitutional limit, there is something known as judicial review that helps Congress's power also be curtailed. If, let's say, there's a law that Congress passes, that the President even passes, and it gets on the books, such as the Defense of Marriage Act, interest groups can get involved in these kinds of laws and claim that these laws are unconstitutional. If the interest group does claim that the law is unconstitutional, then automatically, and the case goes all the way up to the Supreme Court, as the third legislative body, has the ability to go ahead and remove any laws that Congress makes that violate the Constitution. So that in itself, again, is a limit on Congress's power. Another limit on Congress's power is the President. The President can go ahead and decide that Congress passes a law and it gets to the President's desk, and yet the President feels it does not adequately represent either his interests, or in this case his interests, or the interests of the people, and the President can go ahead and veto those laws. The Congress has the ability to veto the President, but the fact that the President can veto any kind of bills that get to his desk that can become, before they become law, again limits Congress's power. So let's talk about members of Congress and how districts affect them. So districts are primarily, especially for the House, are really important because districts determine how many members in the House of Representatives there will be. Congressional districts are drawn every 10 years and they're based on census data. And as I said, because they're based on population, let's say there were 5 districts and there was a huge influx of population in those 5 districts, and now you have a much larger population. So the census then, when the census is taken, and the census is taken every 10 years, the census realizes there are more people, a new district might have to be drawn, or districts might have to be redrawn to reflect the increase in the amount of people. Districts are required to be roughly equal in population in terms of population numbers. Reapportionment is assigning how many districts are allocated to each state, because some states will have way more districts than other states, primarily because there are more population, there are higher populations in that state. The idea of recreating districts to reflect an increase in population is known as redistricting. Redistricting can become an incredibly political process. Think about it. Let's say a particular district was highly democratic. It had a bunch of people, and most of the people voted in a democratic fashion. Now there's a huge influx of population and redistricting needs to occur, but the newer populations are a little mixed. And maybe some Democrats, there may be some Republicans, there may be some independents. Now the current Congress member who was elected for that, to the House for that particular district, wants to keep his or her seat, and they want to redistrict in such a way, draw the lines around the neighborhoods in such a way that they keep their seats, right? So both political parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, will fight tooth and nail to make sure the redistricting is done in such a way that it benefits their particular parties. Other thing about the members of Congress that we need to look at are the number of women. Women are woefully underrepresented in Congress. The next slide will show us how. Though I just heard today on the news that this particular Congress has over 100 women, which is awesome because, as you can see, as this photograph shows, there was a record 17 women in 2011, and by 2012 or 2014 we thought of 30. And we thought that was an awesome number, but this year I think we have an unprecedented amount of women in Congress, which shows that we are becoming a Congress that is more representative of the population. And what do I mean by representative? Well, let's look at the other slide. this is a really good table. It actually shows you in terms of social group, how many Congress members should we have based on social group. So let's say men and women. Women make about 51% of the U.S. and men make about 49% of the U.S. If we looked at numbers alone, then how many men should be in Congress based on how many men there are in the U.S.? The same thing with women, African Americans, Hispanics, people in poverty, so on and so forth. So we should have around 184 men in Congress if they were representative of the population of men we have in the U.S. In the 112th Congress, if you look at all the way at the final number, we actually, instead of having 184, we have 359. For women, we should be having 226, and we actually only have 76. For African Americans, we should be having 52, we have 44. Hispanics, we should be having 30, we only have 25. People in poverty, people living under the poverty line, we should be having 65, but we actually have none. For lawyers, we should only be having 2, but we have the record number of 167. So let's talk about overrepresentation here, right? Americans under age 45, we should be having at least 300 numbers in the House. We only have 50. Military veterans, we should have 57. We have a high of 118. So what does this tell you? Congress is not mirroring society the way we should like it to. Because remember, a representative Congress, which means a Congress that represents the makeup of the people, is a responsive Congress. And if we look at these numbers, it just goes to show us that we don't have a representative Congress. If we don't have a representative Congress, how can we say that we have a responsive Congress? Something to think about. Before I go on with this one, I want to read out one particular aspect of the idea of representation. If you go to page 114 in your text, the second paragraph, which is under the title of the members of Congress, who are the members, it says, how representative is Congress of the American people? It reads, the first Congress in 1789 included only 65 representatives and 26 senators, all from the most elite families in America. They were rich, white, and male. Superficially, members of Congress today differ little from that first group. They are still disproportionately rich, white, and male, and they have come overwhelmingly from the fields of law, banking, and big business. In the 112th Congress, over half of the members of the House and the Senate are millionaires. From 1985 to 2009, the median net worth of members of Congress rose from $280,000 to $725,000, roughly 30 times higher than that of American society. On the other hand, 30 years ago, more than half of the members of Congress had a law degree, but that number has dropped by half. So think about this. Are we truly a representative Congress, or are we not? Alright, so now let's talk about congressional districts and why congressional districts are important. So we talked about the idea that redrawing a district happens every 10 years as populations increase. It becomes a contentious political process, primarily for the reason that It becomes a contentious political process primarily for the reason that we want the lines redrawn in a particular way, such that the party that, if I'm a Congress member, the party that I represent has the best chance of being re-elected. Well, what if we draw the lines based on party lines? Okay, this idea of drawing the lines based on party lines is known as gerrymandering. An attempt during state redistricting of congressional voting boundaries to create a safe seat for one party. Ideally, we should have a majority-minority district, which means a congressional district drawn to include enough members of a minority group to greatly improve the chance of electing a minority candidate. How do Congress members see themselves? Congress members see themselves as representing the democratic will, or the will of the people. Now, Congress members can either be consider themselves as delegates or trustees, or a mixture of both political. When a Congress member considers himself or herself a delegate, it means that they are responding to the wishes of the majority of their constituents. So if you're a Congress member, especially if you're a member of the House, you are elected every 2 years and you want to make sure that you get re-elected, I can see how you might be more of a delegate because you want to keep your voters happy right? And you want to make sure that the majority of your constituents feel that you are working in their favor. On the other hand, let's say you are a senator and you have 6 years to get reelected, and in between the 6 years, you feel that yes, the people have elected me, and I want to do what they asked me to do, but at the same time, I want to follow my own best judgment as well because they have placed their faith in me. In that case, you are not a delegate, but you are considered a trustee. Most members of Congress consider themselves a bit of both. And that way they are considered politico. Members who vote using a combination of constituent wishes and their own best judgment when considering legislation. Okay? So I would say maybe in an election year, you become more of a delegate, and in a non-election year, you become a little bit more of a trustee, but in most cases, I think re-election is always on the mind of Congress members. What does it mean to be an incumbent in Congress? Well, incumbents are people who are currently in office. The opposite of incumbent is a challenger, someone who is challenging the current incumbent. Okay, incumbents do have a lot of advantages. The biggest advantage, of course, is that the American public generally, unless they're highly dissatisfied, like to re-elect incumbents. They feel that they're better off with someone that they know, that they have elected in the past. And if that person has, even in a mediocre fashion, worked for them, generally the American public are quite favoring and quite forgiving, and they'll go ahead and elect an incumbent. Other advantages of incumbency are the fact that they can do something called franking. And what franking is the ability to send out free mailers to constituents, letting them know all the stuff that you're doing for them, letting them know all the concerns that you've raised or that have been raised by them, and as a result, what are you doing to help those concerns. So franking is an advantage because in a way it's a marketing tactic. It allows incumbents to kind of talk about who they are, what they do, how well they do certain things, and really gives them the ability to go ahead and really establish and solidify their popularity amongst their constituents. They also can do casework, which means they can do things for the constituents because they are part of the Senate or because they're part of the House. They can actually go ahead and make things happen for you, give you a visit to the White House, help you with certain laws, facilitate certain business ventures, reduce taxes for certain business ventures, and all these things they can do, or they can try to do because they are incumbents. Another advantage of being an incumbent is that you don't have a term limit. Unlike the president, who can only be elected for 2 terms, congressmen and women, both senators as well as House representatives, can be elected over and over and over again. We do have Congress members who have been in Congress for over 30 years, and the reason for that primarily is because they have no term limits. So that is a really good advantage of being an incumbent. Once you get that good name recognition, once you've been doing well for your constituents, chances of you getting re-elected are pretty good. Unfortunately, our confidence in Congress is dwindling to almost next to nothing. This particular graph shows us that. The red line shows how some people used to approve of Congress. The blue line shows how hardly any people approve of Congress. And the yellow line shows the number of people who actually do approve of Congress. So 83% believe that Congress hardly is doing